We've seen it in the research that these sort of ad hoc one-time offerings of PD in any field really just don't have that longevity, right? Doesn't
Yes,
last over the
that's right.
decades. And so I think
Hmm.
that alone says something, right? That we need to be just a
Hmm.
little bit more intentional about how we're rolling this out and how we're participating ourselves.
Yes,
Hmm.
absolutely. And it's something we can ask the institutions that provide
Mhm.
PD to think
Mhm.
about as well, instead of just putting all the responsibility onto the teacher themselves, because
Hmm.
that's not fair. A teacher's setting is a complex dynamic system, as we know,
Mhm.
with
Hmm.
colleagues and policies and schools and students. There's a lot of moving parts that change a
Mhm.
lot. And a lot depends on not just the teacher themselves, but how the teachers are enabled to do things.
Mhm.
I love that. A teacher setting is a complex dynamic system.
Yes, those were the words of today's brilliant guest, Yulia Kharchenko, who joined us to reflect on professional development in the world of English language teaching, how it's evolved in recent years, who the key stakeholders are, and how we can ensure that our professional learning is meaningful and sustainable long term.
We're all about reimagining PD on this podcast, and we're excited to share our conversation with Yulia with you.
Definitely one to get you reflecting. We were inspired by our conversation, and we hope you will be too.
Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome to the Teacher Think Aloud podcast, a podcast for reflective practice for teachers of English around the world. I'm your co host, Anna,
And I'm Shay.
and this is Yulia.
Yes, great. Hi. Thanks for inviting me. My name is Yulia Kharchenko. My pronouns are she, her. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Linguistics at Macquarie University in Sydney, Australia, where I work on a postgraduate TESOL teacher education program.
Amazing. That was a very efficient one-liner. Thank you for that.
Yeah, you're our first guest who is located down under, so that's exciting.
Very cool.
Great.
Yeah. So, Yulia, you've listened to our podcast before. That's actually how we came to interact with each other, right? So,
Yeah.
you know what's coming next. You know that we're going to throw an icebreaker at you.
Mhm.
If you could choose a metaphor to describe teaching, what would it be?
Mm. That's a really good question. I think a metaphor for teaching is wearing many hats.
That's a good
Mhm.
one.
You're not just someone who imparts or creates knowledge together with your students. You are someone who looks after your students, takes care of their well-being,
Mhm.
Hmm.
someone who has to have a sort of a rapport and a relationship with your students
Mhm.
while also remaining the authority in a
Mhm.
way. Not to mention all the admin work that you have to do, and
Hmm.
also be a very good colleague to your own network of
Hmm.
teachers and teacher friends.
Hmm.
So, yes, definitely wearing many hats
Mhm.
uh,
Hmm.
is my metaphor for teaching.
I love
Yeah,
that. Yeah.
that's perfect.
I
I
always
couldn't have thought of a
imagine.
better one.
Yeah, I imagine just a row of hats behind you in all different shapes and sizes. And yeah,
Hmm.
amazing.
Hmm.
You.
That you
Thanks
have
so
to
much.
quickly change or
Mhm.
wear two
Yes.
at once.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes. Yes. I like the two at once image. That's perfect.
Hmm.
The Mad Hatter of you. Yes. Perfect.
We are sort of mad hatters, aren't we?
Yeah. Yeah. That is a huge piece of being an educator, isn't it? We need to be able to do so many things.
And one of those very important things, we think, is being a reflective practitioner.
Hmm.
Let's see what got Yulia started down this reflective practice path.
So Yulia, you've been a listener for a long time, and so that's one of the reasons we really wanted to get you on, is you've just been so engaged with us since the beginning. But also
Thank you.
because I'm on Twitter all the time, just casually checking what people are posting, and you had posted something about some presentation you were doing on reflective practice at a conference, and I immediately thought, wow, Yulia would really bring a lot to our reflective practice podcast for English language
Mhm.
teachers. So, why don't you tell us a little bit about what sparked your interest in reflective practice?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose I can go back to the beginning of 2020 when I first started teaching at Macquarie University on this Master of TESOL program with some colleagues of mine. We were teaching together on a unit, on one of the core units in teacher education program. And of course, COVID hit us all a few weeks into the semester. And if you think back to this time, and I'm sure all of us remember the stress of the pandemic and having to quickly learn this whole new suite of new tools, like what is Zoom? How do I share a screen? How do I even check if my students are present in the class? It was such a whole new world for a lot of us. We had probably done some teaching online before, but the COVID pandemic changed it all. And I think at that time, and I'm sure that applies for teachers across the world, there was this rush to quickly upskill in order to be able to continue doing your job. And if you didn't upskill, you had to leave the profession or put your teaching career on hold. There was no other choice, really. So that's when we started thinking about how best to ensure that we continue our professional development and learn things in a way that would be future oriented instead of just trying to fight the immediate fires or fill the immediate gaps in the skills that we have. So the three of us, my colleagues, Melissa Reed, Aggie Bodies, and I, were working together. And we started to think about how we can support our teacher students. We had in-service and pre-service teachers. We had primary school teachers. We have teachers in Australia and overseas, all enrolled in one unit. And we were thinking how we can best support them in not just completing their degree, but also be more effective teachers in the future. And then last year, we saw a similar development with generative AI that scared a lot of people, inspired a lot of people, but also caused another wave of upskilling, and that we can see the amount of courses available online for artificial intelligence and everything that's related to it and how it's going to inform teaching. So we know that there will be future social and technological upheavals that will disturb how we teach and what we know about teaching. That's why we started thinking with Melissa and Aggie how we can best prepare teachers for the unknown future. We as teacher educators will never know, or we will never be able to predict everything the future will throw at our students who are future teachers or current teachers. And therefore, we started thinking how we can incorporate reflective practice as a tool, or as actually a mindset, rather, that we can develop in our students that they will be able to use in the future in order to think about their own professional development. If it helps, I guess, I have two other metaphors for you. If you think about how we were learning in the COVID pandemic, or how we were learning about the generative AI, it's like we were plugging in a hole or putting a plaster on a scratch that we had to fix, right? So we're like putting a patch on something. Where reflective practice and thinking about in what areas do I need to develop? How can I be a more adaptable teacher in the future is more like thinking about your professional development, designing this vision for yourself and putting together like a beautiful mosaic that, pieces come together and everything makes sense. And
yeah, absolutely. That idea of a mosaic and all of these different pieces, the considerations that teachers have to have, not only in becoming more effective educators, but just in the reflection process in general. I think that's a really apt metaphors.
Lots of metaphors today, listeners. See if you can count them as we go.
Yes. So we asked Yulia to go a bit deeper into this mosaic metaphor. How does one embrace reflectiveness as a mindset for PD? What does that look like?
The three of us started thinking about how can we conceptualize this whole idea of reflective practice, and how can we actually teach it in our units, or in Australia we call subjects units. And we came up with the concept of sustainability in language teacher education. There are three components to this framework of sustainability in language teacher education. First is the adaptive expertise. So, of course, as teachers, we all have to be adaptive and flexible constantly and all the time. And we have been teaching teacher trainees and teacher students how to modify lessons, how to reflect in action or reflect on action for quite some time. However, what we want is to prepare us, our teacher students for this uncertainty and develop this adaptive mindset that will make them comfortable with changes, that will make them comfortable with unpredictability, such as COVID or whatever else comes next.
Mm-hmm.
The second component is the autonomy. Autonomy, we know, is taking ownership of your own learning.
Mm-hmm.
And in the context of teacher education, it has to do a lot with increased motivation and confidence. So autonomy is the second component that we like to develop in our student teachers. So we also know if teachers are in control of their agency, their well-being improves. And teacher well-being is a huge thing these days, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another important component is that critical collaborative reflection and reflective practice. We know that as teachers, we can reflect on our practice and we gain valuable insights on it. We want to expand this also to consider contextual, maybe, and emotional factors in teachers' lives. These things don't get a lot of attention. Recently, they have been, actually, which is great in the work of Sarah Mercer and her colleagues. So reflection is also an important part of being resilient, effective teacher who will be able to deal with uncertainties in the future. So these are the three components that we have conceptualized. We've created this concept of sustainability. And this is the concept we have been trying to share in Australia and overseas at professional conferences. We're still conducting some research on it.
That's amazing. I mean, I'm so excited to read once all of your publications that, everything that you have been working on comes out, because this really is the backbone of what we believe in as well.
Yes.
And, even before you said the term sustainability, after you answered that last question, one of my reaction was, yes, sustainability, because it's really easy to just, passively receive professional development, and the professional development might help you develop a certain skill at that time. But unless someone is, supporting you with that,
continuously,
you're not really continuing your own development. Yeah. So I think that all of the points, that framework that you just mentioned, adaptive expertise, autonomy, critical collaborative reflection, all of those components make so much sense. And so I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about, traditionally, a lot of professional development has been focused on skill building. I know Shay and I have both taught plenty of workshops in our lives.
How to teach vocab, how to teach grammar. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yes.
How is reflective practice more effective than that? What are the overlaps? What are the differences? And what can we say about the outcomes of those two different modes of professional development?
I think skill building and reflective practice are not mutually exclusive. I think we all still will have to build our skills in certain areas, and if we identify the need, and we'll continue to do that as teachers. I think what reflective practice really helps us is to see the bigger picture. I'm not sure how it works in the States. In Australia, a lot of the language teaching profession is casualized. A language teacher could be working in one school or moving to another school, or maybe working in several different schools or university language centers. And professional development will be provided in a good institution, but it may or may not match the needs of the teacher.
Absolutely.
And therefore, instead of keeping a selection or a record of some somewhat unrelated professional development activities, or seminars or workshops that just happen to be around, reflective practice actually helps us to think more critically, to identify areas for development. It kind of puts the onus on professional development more on the teacher, rather than, in professional development happening to the teacher.
Right.
Right. Agency. Yeah.
And it gives the teacher more of a chance, I think, to build bridges and make connections, from one context to another. And, not only the adaptability, but thinking about how you can really create synthesis, right, between these different areas that you're exploring, right? Admin can't do that for every teacher. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that's when we think this whole framework of sustainability is almost like a checklist. We actually did share a checklist at one of the conferences for teachers.
I love checklists.
broken down into the three sections. And this kind of checklist or framework can guide a teacher's thinking. Is this professional development activity or choice helping me to become more independent, more critical? Is it filling in this particular skill gap? Is this something that helps me be more flexible in the future? Is it preparing me for, I don't know, teaching online or teaching through using generative AI? So skills building, to go back to your question, I think skills building is still an important element of professional development, but more kind of underlying framework helps with the longer term vision. You're not just fighting immediate fires in your skills department. You're thinking more long-term future.
Yeah. Creating a pathway for yourself. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Nice metaphor too.
Tasty.
Okay. I don't know if I would use tasty, you weirdo, but what do you mean by tasty, Shay?
Well, you're right. Tasty is a strange descriptor here. But what I mean is Yulia's points were really satisfying. That's what I want to convey. She shared really concrete characteristics of effective PD.
Such a great framework: adaptive expertise, autonomy, critical collaboration, and reflective practice.
Yes. And beyond perfectly, succinctly conveying the key elements that make for effective and sustainable PD, she also challenged my thinking, and I guess yours too.
Yeah.
Both of us, I think, were under the impression that PD has shifted from being skill-based to focusing on being more reflective in our teaching.
Right. But she reminded us that they aren't mutually exclusive, and that's true. Skill building is part of a broader matrix that exists within reflective practice. So reflective practice is more of the overarching mindset, as Yulia said, whereas skill building fits within that, but not just for the sake of, like a discrete skill.
Yeah. What I appreciate most about what Yulia is getting at here is that we need to be thinking long-term about our professional development and create a framework that doesn't just put out immediate fires, but thinks about the bigger picture.
Yeah, like how can we be better prepared for when those fires break out? What tools do we have in our tool belts to be able to more confidently confront the ever-evolving education landscape?
Another important characteristic of sustainable and future-oriented PD is that it considers the whole individual. The teacher participating in PD is a human being first and a teacher second.
So PD is just a piece of a teacher's life mosaic. Let's look at how Yulia acknowledges this more holistic approach to PD in her research and teaching.
Brought up Sarah Mercer and her work, and Anna, you and I had Ramin on our podcast talking about holistic professional development. And a big piece of that is really looking at what a teacher is actually able to commit as far as professional development goes, depending on where they are in life or the week or the day of the week. And, so when we think about reflective practice, it really gives the teacher a chance to customize their experience and take into consideration those different elements that are really just unique to their life situation. And I think that really is something that helps it become more effective than, say, these ad hoc sort of skill-based workshops we've all experienced. Yeah.
All the neurons are firing right now. I also wanted to mention, I think this ties in with what you're saying, Shay, about the holistic PD and just what you're saying, Yulia, in general. You mentioned being reflective about the professional development itself, right? So we can be reflective about, how our class went, about our own skills and where we are and what we need to work on and what we're doing well. But I really like that aspect of having a checklist to go through when you're deciding what professional development opportunities to invest in, engage in. That reflective practice, really encompasses everything that we do in furthering our own work as teachers.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, Anna. Yeah, I think it's a mindset that underlies professional development. Yeah. And it's something that we want to foster in our current students. We have a lot of pre-service and in-service teachers already coming to our master's course at Macquarie University. And my colleagues and I are currently looking at how we can build in these elements of sustainability into our current courses. And we have tried to build that into our content. And at the end of the semester, what we do is we ask the students to what extent they've noticed elements of sustainability in our teaching. Have we modeled enough of that to them? Have this in the subject content? And then how they might use that in the future. So this is the research that's ongoing that is really exciting and interesting to see what comes out of it.
Well, it sounds very meta. Tell us a little bit more about, tools. You mentioned a framework that you've been promoting within the program. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
We try to think of some specific examples of, let's say, adaptive mindset or adaptive expertise that we want to develop in our students. So we'll of course model adapting materials or adapting lesson plans, but we'll also ask our students constantly, almost all the time, how will this work in your setting? How will you need to change it for an online class? How do you change it for a class that's doubled in size because the other teacher is sick? So our students are quite used to us asking these questions. These are the little specific examples of, let's say, that element of sustainability that we're teaching. And it's the same in reflection. Reflective practice is a very big thing in the subjects we're teaching. And in this is a TESOL methodologies course where students have to complete a lot of micro-teaching. The way we have organized it, students watch each other do micro-teaching online using a platform called VoiceThread. You probably have seen us writing about VoiceThread as well at some point.
We love VoiceThread.
Yes, we do.
We teach them to provide critical, constructive feedback to each other. So by doing that, not only the students have to watch each other teach and think about what went well or what could go better, but then they also receive lots of peer feedback and our feedback, lecturer feedback, and they have to think about it. And written reflection is built into subject assessment. So the reflection is so ingrained into our teaching that there's no way of avoiding it. The students have to comment on each other. They have to think about the comments that they receive from others, and then they have to write a reflection about it several times throughout the course, continually reflecting. So we hope that we are instilling this habit of continually reflecting on one's learning and development as a teacher.
It sounds
Something
like
that hopefully our students will continue doing after they
Yeah,
graduate.
yeah, it's good to start early, really. I mean, it's a skill that they'll carry forwards with that.
I love VoiceThread.
Me too. For listeners who don't know, VoiceThread is an online platform where you can add slides and video, and your students or other participants can add audio, text, or video comments to interact with the content and with each other.
I developed a series of PD modules for instructors at Fordham University, and I used VoiceThread to increase engagement throughout the experience for the teachers. I like that.
Yeah, and that engagement is important from a design standpoint. You can have teachers move through modules, but if there isn't any opportunity to pause and interact with the content in a meaningful way, you might lose them. And that critical collaboration, as Yulia cited, adds incentive for teachers.
Absolutely. I really like this approach in just about any context, but it's especially useful, I think, for institutions or teacher leaders who are challenged with space and time limitations. Logistically, it can be hard to bring people together, so using a tool like VoiceThread to facilitate sharing asynchronously is really wonderful. Anywho, back to our conversation.
And also, I like your emphasis not just on self-reflection, but peer feedback and working. We always are talking about accountability partners on this podcast, people that you trust within your network that you can, speak to about, how things went and what you could do better and where you are together. And I think that it does really start with learning to provide feedback and be critical together as peers.
Yes, and it's something that teachers do in the school, right? They have this kind of teacher circles or even getting together in the staff room. Talking about what works and what doesn't work and giving each other feedback. It's all part of having your own learning network, right?
Absolutely. Community of practice. Something that stuck out to me within the system that you've created, this micro teaching. I think that that's a really great place for teacher students to start. It doesn't seem as daunting to do a micro lesson and then go through that process rather than doing a whole 2-hour lesson or whole class period. I think that you've created this sort of bite-sized learning experience, which we know is it's so much more comfortable. So that's really, really
Yes,
genius.
that's great.
Yeah.
It is literally 5 to 10 minute video on VoiceThread that our student teachers demonstrate a particular aspect of a lesson. Yeah.
I think as teachers are afraid, I think, to reflect on their performance a lot of times. And so we always say, start off small, choose one thing about your lesson and journal about it. And so it's that same sort of strategy, right? It doesn't have to be all or nothing. A little bit goes a long way.
Absolutely. Yes, it's I think that's a wonderful approach. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense.
A little bit goes a long way and makes an impact on the larger ecosystem, doesn't it?
Totally. Let's see what Yulia had to say about the benefits of incorporating reflective practices for the individual and those in proximity.
Thinking about this beyond the level of the individual teacher, how do you think that incorporating reflective practices into professional development contributes to the educational system as a whole to make it more dynamic? You've already used the word adaptive so many times. So could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, that's an excellent question. Of course, the reflective practice and kind of informed decision making around your professional development does not only benefit the teacher themselves. Students, of course, benefit from a teacher who has the most up-to-date knowledge, has the most up-to-date approaches, tools, techniques, methods. It's so beneficial for student engagement, isn't it? Happy teacher, happy student. I think students are direct beneficiaries of professional development that's well designed and informed. Teachers, of course, I think they have an improved sense of purpose and motivation once they're happy with their growth and development. Their well-being improves, and like Shay said, the whole community of practice grows around the school. There's more teachers who are enthusiastic about professional development or reflective practice. And that feeds to the wider school or institutional context, doesn't it? Because then it takes a few enthusiastic individuals to start a community of practice, and then everyone joins in, and the benefits spread outwards, not just to the students, but to teachers as well. So I think that creates a more engaged, more motivated institution, whether it's students or teachers. And then, of course, whatever happens within the institutions gains momentum. That's your chance to influence policy, a wider policy on perhaps a casualization of the teacher workforce. If we, as teachers and institutions, keep thinking and talking about things that are important to us, ideally, maybe I'm an idealist, ideally that will affect policy at some point, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So even though reflective practice seems to be like a thing we do ourselves in our own individual journals or reflect in our own lesson plans, it's a little, well, it's a lot more than that. And a lot more people benefit from that.
Going back to something you said earlier, having support from the administration to help teachers be able to really apply that and changing that mindset at an institutional level, I think is a really important component of flipping that switch, another metaphor for us today, just to engage teachers and the whole system in reflection on what to do, where to go next.
Absolutely, I agree.
We always sort of come back to this idea that, yes, reflection is highly personal, but what we gain from that reflection really moves outwards and affects, it has a ripple effect, right? We hope that it does.
So many metaphors. Yes.
Yeah, I know.
We're full of them. Very poetic
today. I feel rejuvenated just listening to this conversation. Reflective practice can be so healing.
Listeners, we hope you're feeling the inspiration like we are. Yulia gave us all so much to think about. We invite you to connect with Yulia via X and LinkedIn. We've added her accounts to the show notes.
Yes, remember that later on this year, the research she referred to throughout this conversation will be published, and then we'll be able to dig deeper into the framework she talked about. Yay.
Tasty.
Yeah, tasty. We've provided additional information about how to find her work in the show notes too.
But that doesn't mean you're off the hook with us. Teachers, we want to hear from you. How have you ensured that your professional development is sustainable? What tools or tricks can you share with our community of global educators?
Share your ideas with us via social media or by emailing us at teacherthinkaloud@gmail.com. We welcome your reflections, questions, and ideas.
And don't forget to share this episode and subscribe so you don't miss out on future reflection opportunities.
Thanks so much for joining us on the Teacher Think Aloud podcast. Until next time, friends, happy teaching.
And happy reflecting.